Okay, going to begin tonight. Uh, Sanhedrin, Daf Ayin Gimel. Open it up. Okay, tonight we're going to discuss the Gemara that we had on Friday's Daf, I believe, which was Daf Ayin Gimel, the Mishnah all the way on top of Ayin Gimel 73a. Talks about a scenario as follows: Ve'elu henshe matzilin oson benafshan. Okay, so let's take a moment to understand where we are in this parak. If you remember, the parak is called Ben Soru More, and it segues to the laws of a machteret, right? Someone who attacks someone at night and presumably is there to steal his money. The Torah gives permission to kill him, for the homeowner to kill the robber. And then it goes into the laws of a Rodef. So the way we got to a Rodef, if you remember, is that the Ben Soer Umora, it says Nidan al Shem Sofo, right? The Ben Soer Umora is judged based on his future. Okay, whatever that means, it's a little difficult to justify, but nevertheless, we have a bad feeling about this particular person. And then from the Ben Soer Mora, we also say, well, there are other people who are Nidon al Shem Sofo, and one of those is the Hababa Machteret. And once we talk about Baba Machteret, the Mishnah segues to Rodef, because a Baba Machteret by definition is a Rodef. He has no liability if someone kills him. So he's a classic Rodef. Okay, so that's how we get to talk about a Rodef. So the Mishnah, Anayin Gimel, just to keep you updated, talks about other people besides the Baba Machteret that you're allowed to kill. And the expression that's used is a very beautiful expression. The Mishnah says, Matzilin osan benafshan. Okay, now you read the Mishnah and you don't think about this, but Rashi has two little words. He says, "Elusha matzilin osan min ha'avera." If you're stopping someone to sin, that's a great thing. But unfortunately, the way you're stopping him is by killing him. So you would think maybe, it's not a preferred method. Okay, that's why we say no. That is exactly what a Rodef is all about. You're allowed to kill somebody if that's the only way for you to prevent him from doing a certain sin. So the debate is, well, what kind of sin does this person have to do for the balabayas, or for the person trying to kill him? What kind of sin has to be being done? So the first case is Harodef Achar Chaveru Lahargo. So that's your classic murderer, right? Person A is about to murder person B, right? So person C gets up and shoots person A. That's your classic Rodef, okay? And person C is totally permitted to kill person A, who is going to be, or was going to be, a murderer, okay? So what you're doing is you're preventing the murderer from committing the act. Okay, so the way you prevent him is by killing him, and he's saving himself. Okay, that's what this is all about. You're saving yourself by taking a bullet, okay, so that you don't get to commit the sin. So that's when it comes to a murderer. That's, as we've been learning, the top three sins, obviously murder is ranked high up there. So in order to prevent, you're preventing a life from being taken, you're killing somebody else. Okay, so that's the first case. And the echad hazachar. I'm sorry, v'achar hazachar, v'achar hanar murasa. Okay, the second and third example in the Mishnah, I'm allowed to prevent somebody from committing an act of homosexuality. Okay, that's one case. Or we're not going to talk about that. The achar nar marasa. The third case is let's call it let's call it a rape. Okay. Now no one's dying over here. That's the key over here, right? And if you think about it, you would say, well, I understand if you see, a murderer on the loose, and who knows what's going to happen. So logic would dictate, yeah, I could kill that murderer because he's gonna kill someone. So that intuitively, on any level in almost any moral society, could fathom that that notion. But if somebody is sinning, okay, with gilu arayos, that's less of a reason, I would think, for you to go and kill that person. But nevertheless, it makes the list, okay, of sins that I could kill somebody for in order to save himself from, from this horrible, punishment and this horrible sin that this person is going to get if he commits this act of gilu arayos. Okay. Aval harodef achar behema. So those are the three examples. Okay, so you're going to say, okay, well, maybe what if I commit a less of a sin? Okay, what if I see a person about to perpetrate a sin, and it's with an animal? Okay, bestiality. Okay, so the Mishnah ends off by saying that if the sin is not on a high level, as murder or rape with an armorasa or mishkav zachar, an act of homosexuality, okay, so if it's on a lesser of a level, then I don't have a right to kill that person. I could try to stop him, I could talk him out of it. Whatever it is, I don't have a right to take a life. Okay, now the chiddush in the Mishnah, at least, is Shabbos, meaning if I see somebody about to work on Shabbos, I mean, if you even think of the Havamina, you would say, wow, that's preposterous. It's almost like in the Havamina, the fact that the Mishnah had to say that it's not permitted means that you could say, well, I see a person about to get into his car on Shabbos. I may actually think that I could take his life by sparing him the punishment. Yes, Shmuel.
I understood the homosexuality to mean homosexual rape because it's only the act of the person who's sodomizing somebody else. That's who you could kill. I understood it to mean like that it was clearly not both parties' will. Only one party wanted to do it. So it's like the Nara Marasa.
Uh-huh. Okay. Unclear. Unclear at best. Okay. Perhaps. Anyways, so getting back to this, so just learning the Mishnah, you would think that it's a that well, Shabbos, even Rashi points out Shabbos is a biggie. Shabbos is compared to Avodah Zarah, which is compared to Ritzicha. So Shabbos is really high up there. So the Mishnah says no. You see someone about to commit a avera regarding working on Shabbos, doing one of the malachos, okay, you don't have a right to kill him. But again, that's a really, really interesting, point that the Mishnah actually had to say that. So that itself, it is worth noting. Okay, so that's the Mishnah that basically tells us this din of Rodef, that a vigilante is allowed to, as we say, take the law into his own hands and shoot down the Rodef. So the Gemara wants to know. We'll start the Gemara. The Gemara wants to know, Tana Rabbanan, minayin lerodef acher chaver lahargo shenitin lahatzilu benafsho. Where is this concept? Okay, in the Torah, that there is a permit for somebody to shoot the Rodef in order to stop him from killing someone else. Talmud lomar lo Talmud al damreyecha. Okay, so the Gemara quotes this pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim, lo samar al damreyecha, do not stand idly by. Okay, this says we're going to obviously analyze. This is going to be the key for this class. This has been a battle cry over the millennia of most notably us Jewish people, that we stand by this edict of not just standing idling by while your brothers are suffering. This is the source. Lo samar al dam re'echa. So the Gemara says, okay, well, and if you look in Rashi, he says, "Lo ta'amid atzmacha al damo ella hatziluhu." Don't be passive. Don't watch and wait. Take action and save that person. So Gemara says, parenthetically, "V'halachi hu da'asam yubai le'likidetanya." I need that pasuk not to tell me the law of a rodef, because it's not really comparable. Because I understand that I have to take an act, I have to do an action to save someone, but who says I'm allowed to kill that person, right? So maybe the Gemara says that's stretching it a little bit. So we actually need this pasuk, lo Talmud Amarecha, to tell us something a little bit less stringent than actually killing a rodef, which is where someone else is in danger, but not by somebody else, but by a natural occurrence. Okay, for example, look at the Tanya, minayin laros chaver shu toveh benahar, ochaya gorarta, or listin bayin alav. Okay, he's being attacked. Well, one example is listim. One example is he's drowning. Okay, or if he's being pulled away by a wild animal, shu chayav lahatzilo, you must save him. You can't just, as we do today, whenever there's something, whenever there's something bad that happens, everybody's first reaction is to take out their phones and start filming it rather than actually helping, right? We're more interested in getting it on our phone than actually helping, unfortunately. But how do you know that you actually have to help? Talmud lomo lo samud al dam reyecha. So it's using our pasuk, lo talmud al dam reyecha. So the Gemara says, well, which one is it? So the Gemara says, you're right. Inachinami, you are right. That what? That the pasuk of Los Hamud al Dam Reyecha is for the last case of seeing your friend in danger, about to drown. So if that's true, how do we know the din of Rodef? So how do you know that there's a din of Rodef if we use the pasuk of Los Hamud al Dam Reyecha for a different drasha? So the Gemara answers and says, Asya bakal v'chomer, minar marasa. I'm going to learn it out from a nar marasa, okay? Which is one of the cases that the Mishnah said that you're allowed to actually kill someone who's about to rape an nar marasa. So, manar marasa shelo ba'el lepogma amra Torah nitan lahatzila benafsho. So if you think about it, if you go on the pecking order, like a rodef would be all the way on top. That's the most stringent, because he's out to actually kill someone. Someone raping, you could say, well, why do you have a right to shoot that person? I mean, I don't know what today's law would be, but I would imagine that if you stop a rapist, right, before he's about to rape someone and you shoot them, you're probably looking, at manslaughter. Okay. So here we're actually, we're complimenting the person. We're saying that, wow, you did something great. You prevented something. So what did you prevent? So with a rodef, he prevented a murder. Here, but all you did, the Gemara says, Marna Marasa Shlo Ba'el Pogma. At the end of the day, the girl isn't being killed. She's just has pagam. Okay. And back in those days, it was a busha. Okay, or as Rashi says, a zilzul, that now this girl is going to grow up and she may not get married quickly. She's going to have a pagam, right? She's going to have a scarlet letter on her, okay, because she unfortunately was raped. She wasn't killed, she was only raped. But nevertheless, we have a permit, right, to kill this rapist. So if that's true when it comes to someone only who's going to have a pagam, You're allowed to kill this rapist. This is a kal v'chomer, a pretty obvious kal v'chomer, that what? That if you could stop a rapist, then certainly you have a right to stop a murderer that's on a much higher, like we said, much higher level because you're murdering someone as opposed to just raping someone. Okay, you could see, this is lots and lots to talk about. The Gemara actually goes on. I'm not going to continue the rest because I want to get to some good stuff. But the Gemara says, well, we have a problem of onshin min hadin, right? Because we just made a kal v'chomer, but we know that you can't make kal v'chomers to punish someone. Okay, so the Gemara gets around it. I wanted to look at this pasuk, if you don't mind, because these psukim are very, very important to darshan. Okay, because we're going to ask ourselves a bunch of questions. The first question is, first of all, where does this pasuk come from? Lo samel dam re'echa. So we all know it comes from Parshas Kedoshim. So whenever we learn specifically Parshas Kedoshim, and we say this almost every week, where there's always a pasuk either in Kiteitzeh or in Kedoshim, right? We always like to look at what's around it. So Lo tamid al dam re'echa is not only around a completely different law, it's actually within the same pasuk. And most people probably wouldn't know this unless you're a Baal Koreh, but the pasuk actually says in 1916, okay, Perek Yutes pasuk Tezayin, Lo selech rachel ba'amecha, lo ta'amod al dam re'echa ani Hashem. Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, as important as it is, and as I called it, I think a battle cry, and right, a very, very, very used pasuk, especially today with hostages and all the terrible situations that we're in. It actually didn't merit its own pasuk. It's a continuation of a pasuk that talks about something also pretty bad, but doesn't seem as awful as Lo tamid al dam re'echa. It talks about the law of rechilus, which we'll call lashon hara for now. So the pasuk starts off by talking about rechilus, and it ends with Lo samid al dam re'echa. So what exactly does this mean? So whenever we analyze these psukim, we always look at Rashi, Ibn Ezer, sometimes Unklos. So we're going to look at our first source, which is the Targum Yonasan, Ben Uziel. Okay? Again, we all know what the pasuk really means, but by now you should know that a lot of Parshanim do not interpret the pasuk the way the Gemara does. It interprets it sometimes in its literal sense, or sometimes in something that we didn't think of. So the Targum Yonasan says, Lo timna zechu dechavrach lemisade aloi bedina ani Hashem. The Targum Yonasan actually defines it vis-a-vis dine mominus, which is basically don't hinder the acquittal of your friend in witnessing against him in the judgment. Meaning, if he has a way of winning a judgment, don't hinder the possibility of him winning. Do something helpful so that he doesn't lose. Now, we know, as we're going to see later on, that's certainly an application of Lo samid al dam re'echa, but it's not, what we define it as. We define it more as something more, more critical. Someone's dying, right? Because there's the word dam in there. And it's interesting, if you think about it, I think the reason why a lot of these mefarshim are not going to explain it literally is because we had a similar pasuk of Lo sochel al hadam. There's something about the word dam that we just don't like to take literally, right? Do you remember we had a few weeks ago in the daf that Lo sochlu al hadam, I think, holds the record for the most drushas on one pasuk, meaning it could mean several things, right? The Gemara in Bracha says it means, how do you know that you can't eat breakfast before you daven? Because it says Lo sochlu al hadam. How do you know that you can't eat from an animal before it dies, right? Lo sochol adam. How do you know that the Sanhedrin would fast, right? When they would kill someone, it says lo sochol adam. There's, I think, 7 or 8 different applications of lo sochol adam, and the reason is because we don't know. It's almost like what dam means. We know it means blood. We know it signifies life, but whenever there's dam involved, it gets, no pun intended, it gets a little murky. So I think that's why over here we're going to see that some Parshanim learn it literally, right? No one says it doesn't mean that you can't stand on your brother's blood. That doesn't really mean anything. So here's one example. Targum Yonasan says it's referring to Dine Mamonus, okay? The Ibn Ezer says, well, and this is like a classic Ibn Ezer, because he says, im damim, v'yadua ki kama nirtzachu v'nehergu ba'avur hamalshinut v'doeg ha'adomi le'ed. He says, well, I'm going to answer the question of what is the connection between the beginning of the pasuk and the end of the pasuk. Remember, we talked about Rechilus, then we talk about Losamel Adam Reyecha. So the Ibn Ezra says, well, you shouldn't be mischaber, you shouldn't connect yourself with Anshe Damim. Right? We say Anshe Damim, remember that Umirma, we say that at a siyam at the end. Right? Anshe Damim Layachatu Demeyan. Right? Don't hang out with bad people. Okay. Because it's known that many people have been murdered and killed because of a Malshin. Who's that? Doeg the Adomi. Remember the story of Doeg in Shmuel where he rats out Shaul after he kills the whole city, right? Of Nov Ira Kohanim, I think. So he says Doeg Adomi is the proof. Okay, many people were murdered because of one Malshin, because of one slanderer. So that's the connection between Losam al Dam Reyecha, which is murder in a way, and Malshinus, and tattling on someone. So that's what I'd call a classic Ibn Ezra that connects the beginning and the end. In a similar fashion, well, actually, the Netziv, I want to, just because the Netziv actually goes back and he says, similar to the Targum Yonasan, he says, "Va'od nichlal b'smichut asarat elu shafagav she'azhara lo telech rachil yikol makom lo talmud al dam reyecha." Right? Hainu she'im yodea ish echad rotza ler l'chayiv shel adam. I find out that Ruvain is plotting against Shimon to ruin his business or to screw him out of money or do something horrible to Shimon. Okay, I have to proactively get involved. Okay, so the Hamek Davar, again, is similar to the Targum Yonasan. The Orach Chaim, interestingly enough, he says, what's his connection between Losamod and Rechilus? He says, Litzad shetziva al harechilus hisnebo shelo yamid al dam reyecha. Meaning, she'imra kat achat sherotzin lirtzoach. If I see that there's a group of people that are plotting to kill someone, chayiv lahodio lebal davar kedei sheyatzil nafsho. I have an obligation now. You may say, oh, well, of course. I mean, of course I have an obligation. This is like, this is obvious. So hang on a second. So I have an obligation to tell someone who's about, right? If there was a hit put on someone, I have to go and inform that person. V'lo yama harei ze rechilas, and don't say, well, it's rechilas. Halimata she'im lo gila ozen chavera v'harguhu batu asaras lo samod. You're mevatel lo samod if you fail to notify. V'tzeh ulmad b'maisa Gedalia ben Achikam shegila lo ukshalo chash haya masha haya. Go learn from the story of Gedalia ben Achikam. What is Gedalia ben Achikam all about? So we're going to fast forward to a famous Gemara And here's an example where we're going to go on a tangent, but as you know by now, tangents is where you learn the most. So we're going to completely go off topic for a few minutes because Gedalia ben Achikam is a fast that we all know about, but I'd say 50% of the people who fast have no idea who Gedalia ben Achikam was. So that's why we're going to learn it right now. It's a Gemara in Nida, Daf Samach Aleph on the bottom. 61a on the bottom in Nida, the Gemara talks about that there was a pit that was found. It doesn't matter what the topic is. The Gemara said there was a pit that was found that had bones in it. Okay, it's regarding Tumah, connected to a Nida. But anyways, it says, the Gemara says, Tana hu habor shamila Yishmael ben Netanya chalalim. That pit that was found regarding something completely different, that was the pit that Yishmael ben Netanya filled with dead bodies. This is regarding the story in Yirmiyahu chapter 40, where Yishmael, okay, kills, well, we're going to get to that in a second, but it says that Yishmael filled up a pit with dead bodies that were killed through Gedalia. Says the Gemara, V'chi Gedalia Hargan. Gedalia was a good guy. He didn't kill anyone. V'halo Yishmael Hargan. Yishmael was the one who killed all these people. So why are you attributing it to Gedalia? So the Gemara says, Elamitoch Shahayelo Lachosh Le'etzas Yochanan ben Kereach. Because if you read the story in Yirmiyahu, Perek 40, it's either 40 or 41, that talks about this exact what happened over here, where Yochanan ben Kereach went over and told Gedalia, hey Gedalia, there's a plot against you to kill you, v'lo chash, right? Allah v'kasav ki'ilu hargan. Because Gedalia did not listen to the advice given him to lay low, because someone's out to kill you, okay? These murders are attributed to Gedalia, okay? And that's really the story. Why we fast is a whole completely different reason, but the actual assassination of Gedalia and why it was so horrible, the Gemara says, is because for this reason itself, because Gedalia did not take the advice given to him. And the Gemara on that makes a very famous statement from Rava, Amar Rava, Hailish Nabisha, Alpha de la Kabula lo mi boy. When it comes to Lashon Hara, you shouldn't be makabel, right? People always like to say, oh, I'm not makabel, I'm not makabel. You could be not makabel all you want, right? But we're all humans after, right? At the end of the day, mechash le mi boy. You should at least keep one ear open, right? You should at least listen a little bit to be choshesh. Maybe there's some truth. And therefore, that was Gedalia's downfall. That goes back to why the Orach Chaim says the connection between the beginning of the pasuk of Lo Selach Rachel and Lo Salmod Al Dam Reach. Okay, so by the way, where is the first place, the first source in the Torah of this concept of Salmod Al Dam Reach? So if you remember in Parshas Toldos, Vatoma Rivka El Yitzchak, Katzti b'chayai mipnei b'nos chet, im lokeach Yaakov isha mibnos chet ka'ele, mibnos haaretz lama li chayim. Right, remember the story at the end of Toldos, where after Yaakov does what he does with the brachos, and Esav gets all mad and wants to kill him. So Rivka says, I got to send him away. I'm going to send him to Lavan. And she says, I'm disgusted with my life, right, because of the Benos Chet. If Yaakov marries, right, one of these Benos Chet, what good is life for me? So the Orach Chaim, again, the Orach Chaim, that's two in one day, in 1 hour, says, Katzti b'chayai, lo ratzta liglos hadavar liyitzchak, mishum issa rechilos. She didn't want to reveal the true reason how she was feeling because of Rechilus, and therefore she gave a different reason for wanting to send Yaakov away. Aval Masha Gilta Yaakov Adarab came to mitzvah lo Samuel Damriyecha. But when she told of Esav's intention, which was really to kill Yaakov, that to her husband Yitzchak, that wasn't Rechilus because she's trying to save a life. So here's the first example cited where you have, it's almost like an asay dochalot asay, right? The asay of lo Samuel Damriyecha pushes off this isser of Rechilus. Obviously, life is so precious. So that's what the Or Chaim says at the end of Parshas Toldos. So I want to read now the Sefer HaChinuch because we always do that. So we are going to, let me open it up. We're going to hit number 237. Okay, number 237. Can I find it? 1 second. Okay. 237. Shalo la'amod al dam reyim. Shalo nimana milahatzil nefesh mi Yisrael kishenyirehu besakana hamisa v'ha'aveda v'hiya lanu yocholot lahatzilu b'shum tzad. Okay, that we should not refrain from saving a Jewish life who appears to be in danger when we have the opportunity to save that person at any cost. B'shum tzad. Shenemar lo samer al dam re'echa v'amrin on the Sanhedrin, and he quotes our Gemara that we just saw on Daf Ayin Gimel, Tan minayin l'ros chaver shetove b'nahor chay gorato listem bayim olav shu chayv latzilu b'nafsho shenemar lo tam al dam re'echa. So here comes the good part. V'lo mi boy atzule b'nafshi d'machayev. Not only do I have to personally get involved, okay, in saving the life, ela mitrach umeger nami agiri chayev. And we're going to see this, believe it or not, in the Shulchan Aruch and other in other Rishonim and commentaries, that you either do it by yourself or you hire someone. Okay, I have to do whatever I can, either physically or economically or financially, whatever I can to save someone, I have to do it. And an extension to this, right, kind of like what we saw in the Targum Yonatan, is that I can't hide or I can't hold back from testifying on someone's behalf who's going to lose money. Okay, if I know testimony that's going to help someone win a case, and I decide not to talk, that's a lav. So we learn many things. Okay, so the Minchas Chinuch, okay, actually has two very, very good points. What are the 2 points? Open it up. The Minchas Chinuch raises. The Minchas Chinuch says, first of all, he mentioned this concept of financially. I have to help someone out financially to save their life. Okay, so that itself is a chiddush. Okay, let me read from the Minchas Chinuch over here. Ayin b'rosh ubetur simin tav chavav the im yesh lahanitzol mamon tzarich l'shalom lahamatzil. So, what did we say a minute ago? A person's drowning. A person is stuck. Right? Miners are stuck, and it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to rescue these people. Okay, and I'm the only one around. Do I have to spend money, right, to save these people? Says the Rush, yes. The question is, does a person have to pay you back? Right? That's like, we don't care about that right now. But in the end, it's like when you do something and you get a bill in the mail, right? So here, this is your proverbial bill in the mail. The Rush says, quoted by the Minchas Chinuch, he says you have to do it. Okay, the Mechaber doesn't talk about this law. So that's the first chiddush that the Minchas Chinuch talks about. The second is a case, the Odayin Besma, he brings down the Sma, who brings B'Shem Hagos Maimonos. Hagos Maimonios was a commentator on the Rambam in the Yad HaChazaka. This is a separate shir kloli by itself. Do I have to go now? Okay, let's just take drowning. If I don't know how to swim, then it's not a good idea for me to go in and save someone, because I myself are going to be in sakana. What if I'm going to enter into a suffix sakana? Okay, someone is stranded, and there's a decent chance that if I go after him, I will also be equally stranded, but I may not. I have no idea. So that's what we call a suffix sakana. So that is a huge topic that's debated back and forth. He quotes the Hagos Mamios, who says that you actually have to. Okay, Choshen Mishpat doesn't talk about it, but there is a lot of ink spilled just on that, just on that topic itself, because it's debated about v'chai bahen, right? V'lo sheyamus bahen. So how far do you go to that extension? Okay, so that's an interesting point that the Minchas Chinuch brings. Let us go back to the Sefer HaChinuch. Okay, the second paragraph, he gives you the reason for this mitzvah. So you're going to say, well, saving someone, I mean, that's pretty obvious. So look at the words that the Chinuch uses for why we have this law of lo samar al dam reyecha. Shoresh mitzvah zo yadua, ki kamo sheyatzil ha'echad es chavero ken chavero yatzil oso. What do they call that? Quid pro quo, right? You do for me, and I do for you, right? If I save you, then chances are one day you'll pay me back and save me. So therefore, what? V'yisyashev ha'olam b'kach, and the world will be inhabited like this. V'ha'el chafetz b'yishuvo ki lasheves yitzara. This will not necessarily increase the population, but it will keep everybody alive. We will be inhabited more. Okay, so that's the reason. I saw, interestingly, a similar reason offered by the Shlach HaKadosh. The Shlach HaKadosh says, let me open it up. Where are you? He says basically the reason is Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, which is basically I have a duty for you and you have a duty for me, and therefore, kind of like this reason of the chinuch. Okay, that's the opinion of the Shlach Kadosh, and the way the chinuch ends up. Sorry about that. I'm having the way the chinuch ends up by saying is v'noheges b'chol makom b'chol zman zchar b'menakevos v'ha'over alev v'nimna lahatzil. So let's talk about a person did not save someone that he could have. V'yesh yecholos biyado avar alav ve'en loken alav v'shehu lav she'en b'maisa. This is a classic lav she'en b'maisa because that's exactly what the action is. This is a mitzvah that you have to be active. So if you're passive, it's what we call a lav she'en bo ma'isa, And the rule is lav she'en bo ma'isa ein loken alav. Um, I wanted to go back for a second regarding the opinion of the Rush. Remember the Rush, which was quoted by the Minchas Chinuch, says that you have to pay back. There was a very interesting, got to get a hold of this Chuvas Maharam. Okay, there's a fascinating question, okay, asked by the Maharam. He says, I'm going to read it just the question in English because it's a very, very long tshuva. So the summary of the question is, here's the situation. A and B were captured and held for ransom. Okay, the former, A, was rich and the latter, B, was poor. A spent money with the help of his mother and effected the release of both A and B. Okay, A then claims that B asked to be ransomed and therefore demands that B pay for his share of the expenses. B denies having asked to be ransomed. Wow. Right here, 1 minute, everyone's worried about whether they're going to survive or not. And once they survive, they end up fighting about money. This is unfortunately very typical. But the question is, obviously, A says, hey, B, you got to pay me back. So this goes back to the discussion that the Rush, right, that the Minchas Chinuch brought down is you have to pay someone back. But here, this has a little twist to it. So the tshuva that the Maharam answers is he says a Jew should be ransomed even against his express will and be charged with the expenses incurred. A captive in the hands of Gentiles is exposed to ruthless treatment and incessant flogging, as we are very well aware of shvuyim that are coming back, and his very life is in danger. Therefore, anyone who affects the ransom of a Jew is praiseworthy. He's so praiseworthy that he's entitled to get all the money back for his expenses. So if A claims that he had to pay extra to get B out of jail, B has to come up with money and pay him back. Moreover, Jews threatened by a common danger may force one another to contribute to their means to the measures that will free them of that danger. A and B have to share the expenses in proportion to their wealth. So here's the little, fine tuning in this answer. Is that although you have to pay, it's in proportion to how much you could afford, since they were captured for the purpose of extorting money from them, right? Presumably, right, the Gemara talks about were they captured because of nefashos or mamonos, right? Most people are captured, right, so that you can get something out of them. So if you capture someone who's very rich, you say, wow, right, we have a high ransom, but someone who's not as wealthy, so his value is a little bit less, so therefore everything has to be done in proportion. And I just want to read the words. He says something very interesting at the end. He says, "V'davar pashut afilu." He says, he quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Ayin Gimel, that we saw. The Aleph Mikra, the Haros Chaver Toveh Benahar, the Chayv Lahatzilo. Could you imagine that someone's about to drown and someone's coming in to save him and the person screams out, don't save me. The person who saved says, I'm not paying you because I told you not to. Could you imagine such a case? But it's in here, right? The person screams, don't save me. He may be thinking to himself, because I have no money to pay you if this costs you anything, right? It's like you're forgetting about life and you're thinking about money. It's very hard to understand part of this tshuva. But at the end of the day, if this person screams, don't save me, and then a week later he gets a bill from the Coast Guard and he says, I told you not to save me, right? So you still have to pay that bill. It's interesting. I actually looked up online, speaking of the Coast Guard, when you have all these cases of people that are rescued, right? So what are the policies? Because I was thinking about, the miners in West Virginia, the case in Chile in 2010. So while there are numerous instances of miners being rescued throughout history, one notable case is that of 33 Chilean miners who were trapped underground for 69 days in 2010. Anybody remember that? The Chilean government coordinated a massive rescue operation. They made a Netflix movie out of it that involved significant resources and international assistance. So, what's the maskana? The Chilean government took full responsibility for the rescue operation, and the rescued miners did not have to pay for their rescue. It was covered by the state resources as part of a national emergency response. And the same is true in America. If you get lost in a national forest and right, and they have to spend 3 days looking for you. All these crazy cases that I think are pretty much in the news almost every day because people are getting lost all the time. I guess we don't paskin like the rush when it comes to a government. When it comes to a personal individual, that's a different story. So that's certainly worth noting. In terms of practicality, let us look at the Shulchan Aruch, because believe it or not, there's a whole simon in Shulchan Aruch, Choshen Mishpat 427. It has one sif. Okay, it's called Chayav Adam Lahatzil Es Chavera Ben Begufo Ben B'Mamono. Okay, and it quotes our Gemara, Haroz Chavera Toveh Beyam, O Listim Ba'in Alav, O Chayara Ba'alav, Yachol Hatzilo, Hu Ba'atzmo, O Sheyiskar Acher Lahatzil. Okay, he could either save someone personally or hire someone to rescue someone. V'lo Hatzil O Sheshama Akom, O Mosri Machashvin Lavra. I overhear a plot, right, to put a hit on someone. Otomnin lopach, setting a trap. V'lo gila ozan chavero, and I didn't tell my friend. V'hodio oshiyada ba'akom ba'ana shahaya al chaver v'yachol lepaiso biglal chavero. I could maybe pay off this assassin and get rid of him. I got to do whatever I have to do, and if I don't do it, right, v'lo paisu kirtz b'dvar mela over al lo tamol damriyach. Okay, so it's basically a summary, but it made it to the Shulchan Aruch. I saw a fascinating, and I didn't see this anywhere else. I couldn't believe that I actually saw this. It is from the Chachma Shlomo. The Chachma Shlomo is Rav Shlomo Luria, aka the Maharshal. Okay, he made himself famous.
No, it's the Shlomo Kluger. Chachma Shlomo.
Oh, Chachma Shlomo Kluger. Okay, I'm sorry. Right, there's two. Right, I'm sorry. There's two Chachma Shlomos.
Yeah, Shlomo is the Maharshal.
Right. Okay. You're right. Shlomo Kluger. So he says, "Lefia niyaz daiti lechora din chadash." He says, "I'm going to give a chiddush." Okay, and I didn't see this discussed anywhere. I didn't see this anywhere else except for in the Chachma Shlomo. He says, "Davka im eno derech bizayon lahamatzil." He says everything we're saying is predicated on the fact that the person who's the lifeguard over here, okay, is something that's normal for him, and it's not a bizayon to go out of his way to save someone's life. Az mechuyev lahatzilo begufo. Avlim have hatzala derech bizayon lahamatzil imeno yachol lisko lacherim lahatzilo. So if I can't do it, not I can't do it, it's beyond my dignity to go save this person, right? And if I can't hire someone else, as eno mechuyev lahatzilo begufo, then I don't have a chiyuv to save this person. Im havele bizayon otircha yisera. This is a this is a bomb chiddush, I must say, because it kind of reminds us a little bit of that Chassid Shota Gemara in the Maseches Sota, where it talks about, right, the person who's too from, right, to touch the woman and save her, right? He doesn't want to give her CPR because he doesn't touch women and the woman dies, right? So that's what the Gemara over there calls your classic Chassid Shota. So I'm not comparing this 100%, but this, in my humble opinion, smacks of that a little bit. So where's his proof, right? When you come up with such a chiddush like this, where is your proof that you could say something like this? He says, "Dehu zaken o kedome v'hatam kivan dialfinan hatzala gufa mahashavotalo." Because saving a life, the Gemara, we didn't actually read the end of the Gemara, but one of the psukim is, it says v'hashavoso, where it talks about in Parshas Kitetza about Hashavas Aveda, and the Gemara makes an extension that you have to return a person. Forget about if a person loses his watch. If a person loses himself, he also has to be returned. Okay. And he brings commotion of Beshasu Basma, Imken Kiven Dimitam Hashavas Avedahu, Kumo Aveda, Kaimalan Vihisalamta. So when we're talking about Hashavas Aveda, if you remember at the end of the second parak in Bava Metzia called Elu Metzios, it quotes the pasuk Vihisalamta, Pa'amim Shatam Yisalim. Sometimes you actually are allowed to close your eyes and pretend you didn't find that object, such as Chazal, right? It says that someone who either is makes $1,000 an hour and he can't be put on a task to look for an item that's worth $10. That's going to take 2 hours. It's just not economically feasible. Or he's a zaken or a chola, right? You don't have a rosh yeshiva going around looking for missing pencils in the yeshiva. It's just not lefi chvodo. So that law, the Chachma Shlomo makes an extension to this. Imken hachinami mahashavas gufo pater kahai gavna. He says this is because after all we learn saving a person from the extension of hashavas aveda, and if that's true by hashavas aveda that a zaken ve'enol lefi chvodo is pater from, here too you are pater from. Okay, and he goes on and on. He says, that's why lo samro dam re'echa does not apply to it. Okay, so that's really, as they say in Yiddish, a mud nizach. I found, like I said, I found no one who says anything like this. But there you go. So I wanted to just end off after that big chiddush on with something to think about. So I don't really quote him a lot, although he certainly added a lot of Torah to everyone's life. That is Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. I saw a piece he put in his Haggadah. He wrote a parish, not a parish on the Haggadah. He wrote, he has his own Haggadah, and at the end of benching, he comments on a pasuk that we all say probably 10,000 times in our lives, and we never really thought about it. How does benching end? Nar hayiti gam v'gam zakanti, v'lo ra'iti tzadik nezav, v'zor mavakesh lachem. Okay, so I'm gonna just read it in English over here. He says, once I was young and now I am old, yet I have never watched a righteous man forsaken or his children begging for bread. So if you actually think about this, it doesn't really make sense, right? He says, this line has raised many questions. Surely throughout history, there were many times when the righteous were forsaken. Again, the pasuk says, I never saw a righteous man forsaken or his children beg for bread. Really? We don't see throughout history when righteous people were forsaken. Right? This is one of the questions, according to the Talmud. Moshe asked God, why do righteous people suffer? Right? Remember the Gemara in Brachas Daf Zayin, where we talk about tzaddik v'ralo, rasha v'tovlo, right? The old, why do bad things happen to good people, right? So, what kind of statement in Tehillim, right? Perek Lamed Zayin, where this pasuk comes from. How could David HaMelech say that the righteous were never about the righteous never being forsaken? I have been young and now I'm old, and I have seen righteous forsaken. His health, his honor, and his quality taken. That's not what we were formerly told. So he says, I once heard a beautiful explanation from Rabbi Moshe Feuerstein of Boston. The key phrase of the pasuk is lo ra'iti. Okay, if you look at the pasuk, it says lo ra'iti tzadik nezav, which is standardly translated as I have not seen. The verb ra'iti, that occurs twice in Megillas Esther. Okay, we're going to do a little big perms coming up, right? The pasuk of ra'iti comes in Megillas Esther, which means something else. Remember, it says echa uchal v'ra'iti, right? What does ra'iti mean? How can I bear? That's a double connection to Purim. Bear Hertzfeld's coming up next week. So we have ra'iti and we have bear. How can I bear to watch the disaster that will befall my people? And how can I bear to watch the destruction of my family? Right? So, how could I bear to watch the destruction of my family? The verb here does not mean see, like ra'iti usually means. It means, how can I bear? It means stand by and watch, be a passive witness, a disengaged spectator. Ra'iti, in this sense, means seeing and doing nothing to help. That for Esther, as for the psalmist, is a moral impossibility. We may not stand idly by the blood of our people. Ah, we are our brother's keeper. Translated thus, the verse states, I was young and now I am old, and I have not merely stood still and watched them, stood still and watched when the righteous was forsaken and his children forced to beg for bread. Read this way, not only does it make sense, it also emerges from the core of Jewish sensibility. It ends the grace after meals with a moral commitment. I mean, if you think about it, it's the last pasuk in benching, right? Um, the last pasuk in benching has to, like, what's the connection? So, right? Yes, we have eaten and are satisfied, but that has not made us indifferent to the needs of others. So that's something that we always have to remember. Um, so that's the nice way to end on a note from Jonathan Sachs.